Hi everyone, Big Mike here. And continuing with our tutorial series, it's time to review Firefly the RPG, developed by Margaret Weis Productions and uses the Cortex Plus system. Now, we're not going to cover the Cortex Plus system today, we're just going to cover it in context of the Firefly RPG. So if D20 Live does do another tutorial and we do another game with Cortex system, we'll cover it more in depth there. But for now, this is just in relation to Firefly. Here we go. So, in Firefly, in addition to the usual miscellanea, your character has both attributes and skills. Now, in Firefly, you only have 3 attributes: mental, physical, and social. And no, I didn't describe categories, that's literally what the attributes are called. In addition, you have some 20-odd skills like shoot, sneak, and things like that, but we'll cover the skills in a second. Now, with an attribute or a skill, rather than having a number or a numerical value that denotes an additional modifier to your dice, the value of the stat you have is determined by the dice itself. Let me explain. Let's say you have a character that has a very low mental capacity. For that, you would be rolling a D4, whereas if there were some high-level genius, they'd be rolling a D12. And it goes from D4 to D6 to D8 to D10 to D12. Higher is better accordingly, and you roll that dice for all appropriate rolls accordingly. That means that for every action you'll take, you'll roll your appropriate attribute and skill dice accordingly. Now, the Game Master will, of course, roll against you with 2 dice, or even more, depending on the situation. But I'm going to explain contested rolls in a second. I have to explain your dice pool first. Now, the thing is with skills is that you can have a character that has something called a skill specialty. So let's say you have a character who has a relatively decent shoot ability, or focuses on shooting. You can say that they have a specific specialty in using pistols. If a character's skill has a specialty, you throw in just another D6 into the pool. What that means is that the more dice you add to the pool, the more options you have for higher numerical values. Even though you will typically have your core dice, which should be of a decently high value, you can throw more stuff in. But no matter what dice pool you typically roll, you will always take the top 2 numerical values from the total dice. There are other things that can modify it or increase the number of dice you take from, but typically for just normal generic rolls, roll as many dice as you have, take the top 2 values, add that together, that's your total. In addition, you have something called distinctions. Distinctions are little modifier sentences, or 2-word descriptions. Things like, you're a smooth talker, or you hold a grudge easily, or you're the ship's captain. And you can actually make your own distinctions, but the book does supply a lot of the ones that you will typically run into in the course of a game, and so do the additional supplements. Now, if a distinction applies to a role, like let's say you're trying to pilot a ship or give directions as the captain, and you're using your social ability as well as your typical, let's say, normal command ability. Because you're ship's captain, you'll add that dice into the pool, and of course you'll take the top 2 numerical values. And of course any specialty dice will throw in as well. Now, the thing is about distinctions is that instead of rolling a D8, and distinctions are universally D8s, you can actually roll a D4 instead of a D8. And what this does is it gives you plot points. And I'll explain plot points in a little bit. Just give me a couple of seconds. In addition, distinctions also have little secondary abilities too that you can buy at character creation, and even more so as you go forward in an adventure campaign, that you can spend plot points to use in a given scene or so. Now, you would think at this point there's not many more places where you can get dice, but you'd be wrong, because there's a thing called signature assets. And these are things that are known items that you'd hold, like in the case of Firefly, Malcolm Reynolds' ship, or Jane's gun Vera. And if you're using them and they apply to the dice roll, they add a d6. Yes, it is a little confusing, isn't it? Now, plot points. Plot points can do a lot of things in the course of a game. You have a certain amount at the very start, and you can earn them very quickly by, as I said, taking your distinctions at a D4 instead of a D8, as well as there's other things that the Game Master can do to give you plot points throughout the course of the game. Typically, you'll use a plot point to either ensure that you use an additional dice when you roll your pool. Like, let's say you got 3 or 4 dice and you want to use 3 dice values as opposed to 2. You spend a plot point and a third one counts. In addition, you can activate special abilities, prevent yourself from being taken out of a situation in a roll, or use your big damn hero dice, which I'll explain in a little bit. But first, I have to explain how rolls are contested. When you typically roll and you're opposing the Game Master, both of you will roll your dice pools. If ever you get a 1, even if you succeed at your roll, the Game Master can give you a plot point and say, I'm going to add a D6 complication to all of your rolls under a certain thing. So it'll be a thing like, you tripped and fell. Now you got a sprained ankle, D6 complication. That's going to affect wherever it applies. If ever you roll all ones and you fail completely, the DM doesn't have to give you a plot point to add that complication. He can just add that accordingly. In addition, if you ever fail a roll, he can also keep giving you complications on top of that accordingly. And let's say you're in a fist fight and you're fighting an opponent and you keep failing rolls, the DM can keep giving you plot points and increasing the complication from a D6 to a D8 to a D12. And if he puts it to a D12, you can actually get taken out of the scene completely, which you generally don't want to happen. So the ideal thing to do is use your plot points to recover or negate consequences so that you can heal them later accordingly within the rules of the system. But you just got to take the time and deal with them. Oh, also, there's no such thing as a critical success in this system. Sorry. Also, ties go to defenders. Usual rule with that. Now, if ever you beat your DM or Game Master, or in this case, Space Master's roll, by a value of 5 or greater, you get something that's called a big damn hero dice. What happens is, the DM has to tell you what the highest numerical dice he used. If it was a D4, D6, D8, D12, whatever. If you beat his check by more than 5, you mark down what that highest dice was, and later on you can spend a plot point and use up that big damn hero dice against him. So let's say I'm using 2 D12s against a player and they beat me by a number of 5. They can mark down that a D12 was used, spend a plot point in a later roll, and they can add that D12 to their dice pool. It's a one-time use thing. You got to keep track of them. And if you have a really terrible Game Master who has really terrible rolls, you can really clean up really well with this system. And that's all the basics of the Firefly RPG. There are a lot more intricacies to what is relatively a simple system that help you control consequences in the flow of the game, and the design of it is really to create something that's very fast-paced and energetic. It's up to you whether or not you think that's actually the case. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this informative, and we'll see you at the next tutorial. Bye!